Welcome back to the End of the Day show. I'm your host, Matt Parker. I know it's been a few days since we've heard from me. This is my first show since September 10th. Today is actually September 24th. So it's been about 2 weeks since I have been with you all, and I've missed the show, missed doing this on a day-to-day basis. I think what I'm going to do is move this to a 2-time-a-week show where I can do longer shows that are maybe more impactful and have more deep stories inside of tech, inside of venture, inside of the ecosystem, and then also focusing on 2 primary memos to support those episodes. I'm going to try that for the next month or so to try to get into a more sophisticated routine of content. On today's show, I wanted to highlight a few stories. One is, what is AI's impact on SEO? So content marketing, SEO, the way people generate leads and inbound is changing. There was a recent report from The Information that shared that people are using AI tools more and more each day. So this week, one of the first stories that I wanted to highlight that's been on my mind is the subject of SEO and how it's changing with the drastic change of AI. There was a report that was very interesting that was put out by The Information on September the 19th, and it focused on this exact story and this exact piece of information that I felt was quite interesting, because I do think it has a drastic impact on the way startups are going to be marketing their companies in the future. And the way SEO works, obviously, and I'm not an expert, but generally you build out, your content engine on your website to rank higher in Google, to be able to be more integrated with Google, ranking higher obviously leads to more leads and a higher rate of click-through, which generally ends up with business. And it's just one form of how you can get more traffic on your website. But this piece that was put out by The Information focused on how AI tools are actually displacing these web searches according to information readers. So this obviously impacts people that are in tech, people that are probably playing around with some of the best and brightest new technology tools out there. Like me, for me particularly, a lot of the searches that I do, I still use Google search from time to time, particularly on my mobile device. But when I'm really on my computer, when I'm doing deep work for, my job and looking for information, a lot of the times I am combing through Perplexity or Claude AI. I'm not a power user of OpenAI, but similar thing. And this report kind of highlighted that. It said basically you're seeing about 25% of people are, using, how much less are you using traditional search engines like Google because of generative AI. And it said that 40% of the respondents, said that they were using it from about, 0 to 25% less, which is not a small number when you think about the business that Google has built with that, right? One of the quotes from it came from Joe Naylor, who is a copyright enforcement company for photographers. Almost my entire Google use is now on Perplexity. When you think about the top 3 AI displacers when it comes to search, OpenAI's ChatGPT is number 1 with about 76% of displacement. And you'll see this, as we'll talk about in our next subject, as OpenAI is putting together one of the most massive rounds of funding in the history of Silicon Valley. They are targeting Google's search business, and Google search business is a massive business, probably in the tens of hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars. It's actually a good question. How much is Google search business? I'm doing a Google search to see how much Google search business is in real time, because that is a good question when you think about the markets. Google searches revenue in the second quarter of 2024 was $48.5 billion, which is a 14% increase from the same period in 2023. This was a major contributor to Alphabet's overall revenue growth, which was up also 40%. So it's fascinating that Google search business is still growing while all of these other products are still growing. But in the most recent year, Google reported to have about $305 billion in revenue just on their search. It's a very large business, right? Just to be quite frank, it's a $200 billion a year business. It drives a lot of Google's other activity. If you live here in San Francisco, you see Waymo cars driving around. All of that is generally funded by search. So when you think about these startups and you think about, well, why is AI so impactful? At the heart of it, if you follow the money, it's impactful because it could potentially be a way to disrupt Google's, $200 billion gorilla. So this report showed ChatGPT is obviously number one, Perplexity with 37%, and then Google's own Gemini product is 36%. What's been fascinating about Google Search, which is why you may see Google Search continue to be the dominant player, they were building Gemini into search. So when you do searches on Google now, the top rank is going to be a Google Gemini, search result. So the game is, are ChatGPT and OpenAI going to be able to attract enough users that just natively make these searches? And I think, from my perspective as a founder, as a business builder, how niche can you be? So if I'm a founder of technology and I'm a builder, my search queries are going to be different than your average person just looking at Google for types of information. Also, as a content creator, how easy are you going to make it for me to find real sourced information? So when I'm talking on my podcast or my show, I'm getting good sound information to talk to my audience, and I have credibility. So those are going to be interesting ways that people use these different products. The other part of the report showed that, what have you used generative AI tools to search for? 74% is explaining concepts. I think that is one of the most beautiful opportunities within AI is, they've basically democratized explanations for very esoteric and oftentimes hard to understand concepts. Another 50% are coming for education, 31% for recommendations, and then 30% for travel and planning. So this is a very interesting report that the information put out, and it does show that, people are using ChatGPT, Perplexity, all of these search engines to, move some of their requesting off of Google's main platform. The last piece for this report was, over the next 6 months, do you think conditions for technology companies will improve or worsen? And this did show that, for the first time in a while, people think that it is going to improve over the next 6 months. So people are on the up and up about technology and where it's going. And it'll be very interesting to continue to travel through and see how this ages out over time. Looks like Google is still doing very well in their search business with 14% year-over-year growth on, tens of billions of dollars in revenue. But it will be a fascinating way to think, as OpenAI now levers up their coffers with more capital, how will they try to attack the search business at Google? Moving on to our second subject today, talking about, there's two primary stories that are happening right now that I wanted to talk a bit about. Visa, right? Just fresh off the press, Visa, who is the largest payment processor in America, they are responsible for about 60% of transactions on debit cards in the U.S. They are now being sued in an antitrust lawsuit that states that the payment processing company is a monopoly. The Justice Department plans to argue that Visa punishes customers, including merchants, when they are trying to use competing services to process payments. Prosecutors are also expected to say that Visa coerces financial technology firms to work with it by threatening penalties on those who do not, and thus squeezing out potential new competitors. The Wall Street Journal previously reported that the Justice Department was examining incentives that Visa has given to Square, Stripe, and PayPal. So this is a very interesting thing if you live in the world of payments, financial transactions, financial technology, which I have for the past 7 years. Visa is a massive player in terms of how everything happens and how people get paid. And it does seem as though, and this is from my perspective, it's very interesting that Visa, MasterCard, in a way, Discover and Amex, but Visa is by far the leader, and categorically they make up 60% of all spend and all transactions. And this is a very interesting piece of information because we obviously are going through an election cycle, and these types of things typically do come from a more democratic, more left-leaning, liberal perspective of government. But when you are a founder, I think these things are generally good. I've only had a couple experiences with Visa. I don't have any negative experiences with them. But when you think about their company from a profitability perspective, Visa is one of the most profitable companies in the world per employee. So I'll pull up a quick stat, and this is always kind of fascinating in back of my mind as a founder of like what you want in your business. But Visa's profitability per employee is astronomical. It's something like, I'll pull it up here. Visa's revenue per employee for fiscal years ending September 2019 to 2023 averages 1.12. Visa's operating at median revenue per employee of 1.12 for fiscal years 2019 to 2023. So what does that mean? It is ranking Visa in a very, very special class of company that is able to generate a substantial amount of revenue per employee. So profitability per employee, which I don't have time to get into, but when you look at comparable companies, many companies are happy to have a 1. Visa ranks at 1.12. Affirm Holdings is about at 1.16. PayPal at 1.14. MasterCard, Visa's, I guess, biggest known competitor, is about 0.79. So they are astronomically better than most of their companies on a profitability basis per employee. And so when you think about that, that is some kind of financial and engineering happening that is giving them this advantage. And the Justice Department is saying there's something wrong here and we're going to sue Visa. I think this will settle outside of court, but if you follow this world, one of the things that the Justice Department, and the reason the Justice Department has been on Visa dates back to 2020 when Visa was blocked in their $5.3 billion attempt to acquire financial technology company Plaid, arguing that that deal aimed to stamp out a young competitor. And so it was always interesting that Plaid was positioned as a competitor to Visa because Plaid has never been in the business of moving money as Visa is until most recently. So it is kind of clear that the Justice Department wants to see alternative payment options, alternative payment processors outside of these Visa and MasterCard, to an extent, networks. I think it's good for the industry. I don't know if this is the best way to approach it, but it is good to see, holistically, potentially more potential players in this space. So that is an interesting story that we will keep track on here on the 4Insights news letter and podcast series. Lastly, another story I want to talk about today is, again, Sam Altman. Sam Altman is back at it, and it looks like he's hitting his stride again from a fundraising perspective, as it is announced. And, it was talked about last week. They started with a $100 billion round value to get funding, and it is continually increased. At the latest, right now, the latest word on the street here in Silicon Valley is that OpenAI is close to closing a $6.5 billion round of funding, valuing the company at $150 billion. It would become the most valuable private company in the world behind only ByteDance, which is the owner of TikTok. So what does this mean and how is this relevant? Well, obviously Sam Altman has figured something out in terms of how he's been able to continually raise exorbitant amounts of capital. And I think one of my most interesting questions about this story is, will Sam Altman finally become a stakeholder in OpenAI, right? Will he become an owner, per se, of the company? The historic synopsis is that he is not currently on the cap table, although he's the CEO and he is pretty much the most consistent piece of this business that's, consistently there. But it is interesting to see if they're going to raise this amount of money, and all the alleged information that we're hearing is that they're going to change their structure. They're going to become a more traditional C corporation like most other tech companies and get away from this nonprofit jazz that they've been pushing for the past 9 or however many years they've been in existence. My big question is Sam Altman going to finally get on this cap table? I think that will clear up a lot of the clutter, a lot of the fuss, or a lot of the hoopla around OpenAI. It's hard to see a man running a $150 billion company not have any equity. I mean, this round is going to surpass valuations of his, arch nemesis, former co-founder Elon Musk, who is obviously the founder of SpaceX. So at a certain point, it just does not make sense for Sam Altman to be the CEO who doesn't own a part of equity in a company. It just kind of creates this real big conflict of interest, because if you're the CEO of this company and you've been, pushed out by the board, brought back, you've seen so much attrition from the OpenAI team over the past year, it just makes sense for him to be on the cap table. I just don't understand how and why. And these are one of the things in Silicon Valley, when you're a hot company and you're doing, I think they're doing something like 60 something or maybe $100 million per month in revenue. They're doing a substantial amount of capital or of revenue over there. And it's just growing at this unbelievable clip that's just unheard of in Silicon Valley. And so this company is so unique, right? Founders, people that are starting companies or working at a normal tech company, it's like, what's going on? This company is like performing at an incredible rate of success. But the question is, that we all have is like, how is Sam Altman not a part of this cap table? I know he's got a lot of money. I know he's got a weekend house out in the Napa Valley. He's got a $25, $30, $40 million house, depending on who you ask, right here in Russian Hill, where I'm at. So it's clear that he doesn't need the money. He's got a car collection that probably ranges in the $10 to $20 million in itself. It's not that Sam Altman needs the money per se, but it is the question of like, how are you going to run maybe one of the most transformative companies in Silicon Valley and not be an equity stakeholder in the business? Just to me, it just doesn't sit right. It's kind of against everything that Silicon Valley stands for. I mean, you look at the big dog, so to speak, in Silicon Valley, the Elon Musk, he's heavily in, from a personal wealth perspective, tied to Tesla, SpaceX, and all of his entities. Jeff Bezos, tied to Amazon. Steve Jobs was tied to Apple. Bill Gates, Microsoft. It's just weird that Sam Altman is this figure that is supposedly the next person in line to be one of the Silicon Valley's most elite and celebrated people, yet he doesn't even own any equity in the company that he's built. So I would just hope that with this new round of funding, it makes it right. Because it's kind of like this, to me as a founder, it's kind of like a mind, shift of like, something is just weird about it, right? It's just something that doesn't sit right with me, that someone in that position wouldn't have any upside. So we'll see what happens with this. I think the official announcement will probably come out next week. I'm assuming that they will clear about $6.5 to $7 billion in financing for the business. And they are burning a lot of money as well, right? Spending a lot of money to build these new solutions, but they're making a lot of money. And the name of the game in Silicon Valley is growth trumps all. And when you're growing at the revenue clip that OpenAI is, it's very hard for you not to have the demand to raise the capital. But there's also an advantage because Sam Altman is presumably one of the best fundraisers in the history of Silicon Valley, and he's been able to clear significant amounts of capital to back that up. So that's all for today's show. Again, I'm Matt Parker, coming back on here. Happy to be back, trying to do these shows regularly. Took a 2-week hiatus, but you can find out more about me and what I do at my Substack, which is stretch4.substack.com. You can also check out our YouTube at 4Insights, so youtube.com/@4Insights. You can also check me out on Twitter at Matt A. Parker. But that's all for today's show. Thanks for listening. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll see you again soon.